My name is Julia. I'm 35 years old. I haven't been on a date in 9 years. I haven't left the house overnight in 10. My father had a stroke on a Monday, I remember, because I was supposed to start my shift at the hospital at 7 a.m. I was a nurse back then. I liked it. I was good at it. I still had my apartment, my car, friends who texted me, "What's the plan?" on weekends. Back then, I still believed that if you did the right thing long enough, life would reward you for it. Then he collapsed. And everything I thought I knew about family, duty, and love, all of it, slowly collapsed with him. He survived, but not the same. That's what the doctors told us. He couldn't walk, couldn't use the bathroom, could barely speak. Left side paralysis, limited coordination, slow cognition. My brother Todd flew in from New York. He stood at the foot of the hospital bed with his perfect jawline and tailored coat and asked me, "So what's the plan here?" The plan? There was no plan. There was only me. Dad couldn't live alone anymore, and I was the only one who could do anything medical. Mom had died 4 years earlier, and Todd was Todd. "I'll help, of course," he said. "Anything you need." Then he flew back home 2 days later. I didn't have kids, no mortgage, no husband, just a soft spot for the man who used to make me cinnamon toast before school and once drove across the state to fix my flat tire. So I left my job, packed my things, moved back into the house I grew up in. At first I told myself it would be for 6 months, maybe a year, until we figured something out. That was 10 years ago. At first, it wasn't so bad. There was a rhythm. I woke up, changed his sheets, gave him his meds, spoon-fed him oatmeal, cleaned the dishes, did the laundry, bathed him, carried him back to bed. I read to him sometimes, old hunting magazines or baseball scores from the paper. He couldn't respond much, but I liked pretending he could hear me. He didn't say thank you, but I thought maybe he didn't know how. Todd would visit once a year, always on Christmas, always with some luxury gift for Dad, an expensive speaker, a leather chair, a new watch. Then he'd wink at me and say, "Still playing Mother Teresa, huh?" That's the thing about slow heartbreak. You don't notice the pieces falling off. They just start disappearing. 3 years in, my savings ran out. I applied for caregiver compensation. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover groceries and gas. Friends stopped texting. I stopped answering. I lost track of the years by the seasons. The humming of the AC in July, the creaking radiator in December. Sometimes I cried in the shower, quietly, so Dad wouldn't hear. I cried because I missed noise. I missed being needed for who I was, not just what I could do. But I told myself it was worth it, that I was doing the right thing, that love, real love, wasn't glamorous. It was sacrifice. I believed that. I needed to believe that. Until I found the folder. It was a Saturday, early spring. The heater had finally stopped buzzing, and I decided to clean out the garage. Most of the boxes were my mom's. Old tax returns, photo albums, books. Then I found one that didn't fit, a black folder with a rubber band around it. It wasn't labeled. Inside were hospital records, lab results, doctor's notes, insurance forms. But the dates were recent, not 10 years ago, not 5, just last month. And the strangest part, they said, patient in stable condition, full mobility, no neurological deficits noted. I sat on the cold cement floor for a long time, just staring at the words. I thought maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were about someone else. But it was his name, his birthday, his social security number, my father, the man who hadn't walked in a decade. That night, I gave him his dinner, the usual: soup, cut up toast, applesauce. He lay motionless, eyes glazed, head tilted like always. I wiped his mouth, changed his clothes, helped him to the bathroom. He said nothing. He never did. But now, I wasn't sure if the silence meant couldn't or wouldn't. I couldn't sleep. I stayed up reading every page of that folder. Some from private clinics, some from hospitals in another county, some just weeks old. The blood work was perfect, muscle mass normal. No damage to the brain. It didn't make sense, unless it made too much sense. The next morning, I drove to Best Buy. I bought a small hidden camera, the kind you use for babysitters. I tucked it in a fake plant in the living room, then I waited, and for the first time in 10 years, I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. Because if I wasn't, then everything I gave up wasn't sacrifice. It was theft. I didn't check the camera for 2 days. Part of me was scared, terrified actually, because the folder in the garage already told a story I wasn't ready to believe. I still hoped maybe he'd been improving slowly. Maybe he hid it from me out of pride. Maybe it wasn't malicious, just misguided. But deep down, something had shifted. I stopped looking at him the same. I noticed small things. The way his eyes sometimes followed me just a little too precisely. How he flinched when I dropped a spoon behind him. Something he never reacted to before. Once, I forgot to lock the wheelchair brakes. I came back 5 minutes later, and it hadn't moved, but his slippers had. They were shifted, like someone had nudged them with a foot. Still, I waited. I wanted undeniable proof, so on the third night, when he went to bed, I pulled the SD card from the fake plant, plugged it into my laptop, and hit to play. The footage started around 9:12 p.m. I saw myself leaving the room, turning off the light, shutting the door. Then, nothing. For 7 minutes, he lay still in the glow of the hallway nightlight, just like always. Then his right hand moved, just the fingers at first. Flexing, stretching, then the elbow, then the shoulder. I held my breath. He blinked, sat up slowly, swung both legs over the bed, planted his feet. Then he stood, fully, effortlessly. He didn't wobble, didn't struggle. He stood like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Then he walked, calm, steady steps to the kitchen, opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of white wine, poured himself a glass, and drank. He even chuckled, a soft, smug little laugh, like a man alone in a joke no one else would ever hear. I stared at the screen, shaking. 10 years. 10 years of sponge baths, adult diapers, feeding him with a spoon. 10 years of missed weddings, friends moving on, watching the world from behind a bedroom curtain. And there he was, drinking wine, alone, at peace. I rewound the footage, watched it again, slower. Frame by frame, he stretched, popped his back, rubbed his neck. Then before heading back to the bed, he did something that made my stomach cave in. He walked to the bookshelf, took down a cookie tin, and pulled out a phone. A second phone. One I had never seen. He scrolled, texted, smiled, then tucked it away, returned to the bed, positioned himself carefully, adjusted the blanket, and resumed the exact posture I had left him in. Paralyzed, helpless, innocent. The next morning, I made him eggs. I said nothing, acted normal. He grunted when I asked how he slept, but I wasn't watching his face anymore. I was watching his hands, the control in his grip, the subtle coordination as he pretended to fumble with a napkin, the fake stiffness, the rehearsed clumsiness. It wasn't just a performance, it was a ritual. And I had been his audience for a decade. I thought about confronting him that night, screaming, demanding answers. But something stopped me because this wasn't just a lie. It was a life sentence, one I'd already served, and I needed more than closure. I needed witnesses. So I left the camera on every night, and every night he repeated the same routine. Stand, stretch, walk, whine, laugh, phone, bed. I started noticing other things. His socks were always clean in the morning, but I hadn't changed them. The toothpaste tube was always a little flatter than the night before, and once I woke up to find the living room light was off, even though I'd left it on. He was living a secret life inside my house. I called Todd. I didn't tell him everything, just asked if he could visit soon. He hesitated, said his firm was underwater with a big case. I said I found something in the garage about Dad's medical history, some insurance forms. Then I waited. There was a pause, a long one. Then he sighed. I didn't think you'd ever see those, he said. I went cold. He knew. All these years, he knew. I didn't want to get involved, he added. It just seemed like you had it handled. I asked how long he'd known. He said 6 years, maybe 7. I asked why he never said anything. He said, because you always looked like you wanted to be needed. I didn't think you'd leave him anyway. I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, trying to remember what my life was supposed to be. 2 days later, Dad called me into his room. Julia, he rasped, you think we could do a little dinner? Just family, for the anniversary next week. Anniversary? I asked. He nodded. Of the stroke, my second chance. The irony nearly choked me. He wanted to celebrate the lie. I smiled. Sure, I said. Let's make it special. And I meant it. I was going to give him a night he would never forget, not ever. I spent the week preparing. Not just the food, not just the table. I prepped like a soldier getting ready for war. Everything had to be perfect. I wanted them calm, comfortable. I wanted the wine flowing, the roast warm, the lighting soft. Because the last thing a liar expects is generosity. Dad stayed in his bed all week, of course, playing the same tired role. I wheeled him out to the porch once, wrapped a blanket around his legs. He stared off into the trees like some war hero waiting to die. I almost laughed. He wasn't dying. He was thriving. And Todd? He booked a flight, said he felt weird about our last call, said he owed it to Dad to be there. I didn't respond, just told him what time dinner started. Saturday came. I made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, rolls from scratch, the whole nostalgic fantasy. The house smelled like childhood. I think part of me wanted to poison the memory. At 5:30, Todd arrived. Designer coat, perfect smile, holding a bottle of Napa Valley Red. He hugged Dad, patted him gently on the shoulder like some fragile old monk, said, "Still hanging in there, huh, Pop?" Dad gave his usual soft, wheezy grunt. I wanted to slap them both. But instead, I brought out dessert early. Strawberry shortcake, Dad's favorite. I even lit a candle. "Happy 10 years, I said. They laughed, toasted. It was all fake. Every smile in that room belonged on a stage, but I played along because they thought this was the finale. They didn't know it was just the beginning. When the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I got up, went into the den. They thought I was grabbing photo albums or maybe a gift, something sweet and sentimental, but I came back with a small black flash drive. No one noticed at first. I plugged it into the TV, opened the folder, clicked play. Then I sat down. The footage filled the screen. No music, no narration, no tricks, just a silent room, a man lying still, then moving, His fingers, his legs, his body, rising, standing, walking, the wine, the fridge, the secret phone, the stretch, the smirk. At first no one spoke. Then Todd said, "What is this?" I looked straight at Dad. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared at the screen like a man watching his own funeral. Then Mom's sister, who'd come out from Phoenix, gasped, "Oh my God, is this real?" I nodded. "It's from Tuesday night." Silence again. Todd stood up, walked slowly toward the screen. You've been walking?" he said. "All this time?" Dad still didn't speak. He didn't need to. The footage was doing all the talking. Then finally, he looked at me. And for the first time in 10 years, he said my name. "Julia." Just one word, but it hit like a hammer. He reached for the table, pushed back his chair, stood up, right there, in front of everyone, not wobbly, not clumsy, just a man, exposed. The room gasped. I looked at Todd. His face was pale. He said, "I thought you were just exaggerating. I didn't know he was this." Dad tried to speak again. "I didn't lie. I needed you. I was afraid." I cut him off. "No, you weren't afraid. You were in control. The whole time." He stepped toward me, a hand outstretched, pathetic, trembling, fake. "I didn't want to lose you," he said. "You're all I had left." That was the moment I understood. It wasn't about love. It was about ownership. He hadn't needed me. He had used me. Todd sank into a chair, buried his face in his hands. My aunt whispered, "Jesus, Frank, what the hell is wrong with you?" But I didn't wait for more. I stood up. "I'm done," I said. "I wasted 10 years on a lie. I won't waste one more second." Then I walked upstairs, packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't look back. Not even once. That night I checked into a hotel by the river. The sheets were too clean, the room too quiet, but I slept for 9 hours straight. In the morning, I called a lawyer, told him everything. The false disability, the insurance fraud, the caregiver payments, every dollar, every form, every lie. He said we had a case. And it would get ugly. I said, "Good." The courthouse smelled like paper and coffee, that mix of bureaucracy and stale time. I stood in line holding a folder that felt heavier than it was. Inside, the medical records, the camera footage, the dates, the names. 10 years of caregiving turned into 10 minutes of silence under fluorescent lights. I remember the clerk looking at me, confused. "Are you reporting insurance fraud on behalf of your own father?" I nodded. Didn't blink, didn't explain, just handed her the forms. Because how do you explain a decade of betrayal in a sentence? You don't. You just sign where they tell you and try not to shake. The investigation didn't take long. The evidence was airtight, and I wasn't the only one who'd been defrauded. He'd been collecting state disability, federal caregiver support, and veterans' benefits, despite never having served. That last part broke something in me. He'd lied about being in Vietnam. I found the paperwork, the fake discharge letter. He didn't just steal time, he stole honor. The government froze his benefits within weeks. Then came the subpoenas. Court dates, depositions. Todd called. I didn't answer. Then he texted. "You didn't have to destroy him." I stared at the screen. Destroy him? He destroyed me. Word got around. The neighbors stopped waving. Someone left a note on my windshield that said, "Heartless bitch." Even my mother's sister, who had seen it all with her own eyes, sent me a voicemail. "I know he lied," she said, "but he's still your father." And maybe that's the part that stings the most. That people would rather believe in a fake cripple than a real daughter who finally said, "Enough." I stayed in that hotel for a month. long enough to find a temp job at a nursing home across town. Low pay. Long hours. But I didn't care. I needed to be around people who actually needed help, who didn't fake suffering to chain someone else to it. There was one resident, Mary, 84, with late-stage Parkinson's. She gripped my hand one morning and said, "You've got sad eyes, but strong ones." I almost cried because it was the first time in 10 years someone saw me. Not just my hands, not just what I could do, but who I was. The case against my father escalated. Federal fraud. State fraud. Insurance companies joined in. He pleaded not guilty, of course, said it was all a misunderstanding, that he had episodes of recovery followed by setbacks. But the footage said otherwise, and then they found the second phone. Turns out, he'd been texting a woman named Cheryl, a widow from the next town over. He'd told her he was trapped with an unstable daughter, that he couldn't leave because I'd threatened to overdose if he did. I read every message. They made me physically sick. He said I was unhinged, said I had rage fits, said I needed to feel useful or I'd break. And Cheryl, sweet, gullible Cheryl, brought him wine, brought him cigars. They even went to a motel twice. He told her he slipped away while I slept. It was all a story. All of it. Even his dependence wasn't just about control. It was about having freedom without responsibility. He got to live like a bachelor while I wiped his ass. At one point, his lawyer reached out, offered to settle. If I dropped the charges, they'd repay a portion of the benefits. No trial, no press. I said no. I wanted it public. I wanted him public, because the man who ruined my life didn't deserve to fade quietly. The hearing was scheduled for late September. I remember sitting outside the courthouse, hands in my lap, watching my own breath fog the cold morning air. Todd showed up. Didn't say hello. Just sat beside me and whispered, "You're really going through with this?" I said yes. He shook his head. "You used to be kind," he muttered. I didn't respond, because I wasn't cruel. I was just done being quiet. Inside the courtroom, Dad wore a suit, walked with a cane, still pretending, but now I knew the rhythm of the lie, the pauses, the stiffness, all carefully timed, like a script he'd memorized long ago. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he said, "I never wanted to hurt my daughter. I just didn't want to be alone." There were murmurs in the room. A few people looked at me with something like sympathy, but most looked confused because his mask was still on. But I knew the man behind it, and I had 10 years of proof. The trial was pushed. Too many claims. Too many moving parts. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd already won. Because the truth was out. And now, when people saw him, they didn't see a frail old man. They saw a fraud, even if only for a second, even if they still pitied him. The seed had been planted, and shame, real shame, grows slow but deep. After the hearing, I didn't go back to the hotel. I went back to the house. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it. One last time. The porch light was still on, the same bulb I'd replaced last fall. His favorite mug was still in the sink. Half a crossword sat on the kitchen table, like he'd just stepped away. It smelled like stale breath and medical wipes, a decade of stillness clinging to the walls. I stood in the doorway and waited for the sound of him calling my name, for the shuffle of slippers, for the fake wheeze he'd practiced so well. But there was nothing, just silence, a kind I hadn't heard in years. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, curled up on the old couch, watching shadows slide across the carpet. Everything reminded me of him. The dent in the wall from where I'd accidentally bumped his chair. The corner of the rug I always straightened because he didn't like uneven things. The spot on the shelf where I used to keep his pills, I started to wonder if I even existed outside of this house. Was there still a version of me that laughed easily? One that made plans? That flirted with strangers? Or was that girl long gone? Buried under years of routines? Crushed under the weight of someone else's comfort? I didn't know anymore. The next morning, I opened every window. Let the light in. Let the cold bite at the air like it was reclaiming something. I stripped the bed, tore off the sheets, threw out every bottle, every bag of medical supplies. I stood in the bathroom and stared at the reflection I hadn't really looked at in months, maybe years. I looked tired, but not weak. My hands were still steady, my eyes still clear. Somehow, through all the lies, I had survived. I called a real estate agent that afternoon, told her I wanted to list the house as soon as possible. She asked if I needed time. I said no, because the longer I stayed, the more it would pull me back, and I wasn't going to be his prisoner anymore. Not even in memory. Todd texted again, asked if I was seriously just walking away. He said he'd always admired my loyalty, and that burning everything down didn't make me strong, just bitter. But I didn't respond, because sometimes the deepest freedom comes from not answering, from not explaining, from letting the silence speak for itself. Lani, I took a job at a hospice facility 3 towns over. Not glamorous, not easy, but honest. I changed sheets, held hands, sat with people as they died, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel used. These people didn't fake their pain. They didn't ask me to shrink myself. They just wanted comfort, and I could give that, without giving away pieces of my soul. One afternoon, I met a man named Peter. He was 67. Had stomach cancer, sharp mind, soft voice. He told me once, "The hardest part of dying isn't the fear. It's wondering if you mattered." I didn't tell him my story, but he looked at me like he knew it anyway, like he could see the bruises I didn't wear on my skin. Weeks passed. I started sleeping better. I found a tiny apartment over a bookstore. 1 window, no dishwasher, no closet space. But it was mine. I bought a new coffee mug. Wrote my name on the bottom in Sharpie, Julia, just Julia, not caregiver, not daughter, not servant, just me, one night. I sat at the kitchen table, the cheap fold-up one I got at a thrift store, and opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. I used to write, before all of this, poems.journal entries, nothing special. But that night, the words came back, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to remind me that I still had a voice, still had something to say that wasn't, "Yes, I'll be right there." Sometimes I still hear his voice, not literally, but in the small ways. When I over-apologize, when I hesitate to rest, when I feel guilty for enjoying my own life. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't always leave scars. Sometimes it leaves patterns. But the difference now, I see them, and I don't follow them anymore. Freedom is quieter than I expected. The first few weeks in my apartment felt surreal. I kept waiting for someone to call my name, for the alarm to go off, for a schedule to follow. But there was nothing. No oxygen tanks to refill, no medications to sort, no man pretending to suffer in the other room. It was just me, a bed, a secondhand couch, and a quiet so deep it made my ears ring. The first Sunday morning I woke up without a to-do list. I cried. Not from sadness. Not exactly. It was the ache of space. like someone had opened a window inside my chest, and the air was too sharp, too clean. I didn't know what to do with it, what to fill it with. Because when you give your entire self to someone else for a decade, you forget how to be alone without feeling useless. I made coffee and let it go cold, watched the sun crawl across my floor, and realized I hadn't watched sunlight just to watch it in years. Not since before the chair, before the lie, I started walking again. Nothing intense, just loops around the block, past quiet homes, rusted mailboxes, and porch swings that reminded me of nothing and no one. That was the best part. No ghosts, no associations, just a street, just the rhythm of my feet against pavement. Sometimes I passed a man walking his dog, and he'd nod, not like he knew me, just like I was a person. That nod saved me, more than he'll ever know. One afternoon at the hospice, I helped a woman named Teresa sit by the window. Her cancer was everywhere, bones, lungs, brain. She told me she used to dance in bars with her girlfriends. Said her favorite thing in the world was being barefoot on a wooden floor. I asked her if she was afraid. She said, "Not really. I just wish I hadn't spent so much time holding other people's shame." The words hit me like a slap, because that's exactly what I'd done. I hadn't just cared for my father. I'd carried the weight of his decisions, his lies, his loneliness, like they were mine to solve, like it was my job to be the container for his emptiness. That night, I took off my shoes in the living room, stood barefoot on the hardwood. It was cold, it creaked a little, but it felt like mine. I closed my eyes and imagined a version of myself that had never picked up that folder in the garage. She was still there, but smaller, blurred around the edges. And the truth, I didn't want her back, because pain had given me something she never had, a boundary, a voice, a scar that taught me where I ended and someone else began. The next time Todd called, I let it ring. He left a voicemail saying Dad had moved into a small apartment by the coast, said he was doing better, and wanted to reconnect. I deleted the message because some bridges don't burn. They rot quietly until one day you step on them and fall through. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Cheryl, the woman from the secret texts, the motel visits, the other life. It was handwritten, neat cursive. She said she didn't know the whole truth until the news came out, said she felt humiliated, that she never meant to take part in something so cruel. I didn't feel angry, just tired. She'd been lied to, too. Used in a different way, but used all the same. I never wrote back. Some chapters don't need replies, only closure. One rainy Tuesday, I visited my old hospital, the one I'd left a decade earlier. I didn't go in, just sat in the parking lot, watched nurses come and go. Busy, focused, like I used to be. It didn't make me sad. It didn't make me want to go back. It made me grateful, because I remembered who I was before I gave it all away, and who I was now, after getting it back. Grief is strange when the person's still alive. You mourn what could have been, what should have been, not because they're gone, but because they were never really who you thought they were. That's a different kind of loss. One that doesn't get sympathy cards, but still takes something from you. Still leaves you looking out windows, wondering if you're the crazy one. You're not, and I wasn't. I was just someone who believed too long and left just in time. Grief has a way of hiding in the smallest moments. I was helping a patient. Elaine, 89, emphysema, barely spoke above a whisper. She'd been declining fast. I was adjusting her pillows when she grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold, thin like paper, but steady. She didn't say anything, just looked at me. It wasn't fear or pain. It was something softer. And in that second, I remembered what it felt like to be needed in a way that wasn't suffocating, that wasn't selfish, that wasn't a trap. I finished adjusting her pillows, and when I turned off the light and closed the door, I leaned against the wall and cried. Not because she was dying, but because I wasn't. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about it. The strange thing about healing is how boring it is. It's not some thunderclap moment. It's 100 tiny choices you make when no one's watching. A breath held, a message not sent, a second cup of coffee just because you want one. I started cooking again. Nothing fancy, but real meals. Food with flavor. Food I didn't have to cut into small pieces for someone else. I read books with no purpose. Books I didn't underline. Books that didn't teach me anything, just made me feel. I bought new towels. White. Soft, not utility grade, like the ones I used on him for years. I kept them folded neatly in a cabinet, just for me. These things sound small, but when you've lived in service to someone else's illusion for a decade, they feel like acts of rebellion. A new nurse started at the hospice. His name was Mark. Late 40s, divorced, funny in a quiet way. He always brought extra tea bags to the break room. Said he didn't like hospital coffee. We weren't friends, not really, but he saw me. Not in a romantic way, not in a pushy way, just saw me. One night I dropped a tray in the supply room. Everything scattered, bottles, gauze, meds. I froze. Old instincts kicked in. My body tensed, waiting for correction, for criticism, for someone to sigh and say, "Of course she messed it up." But Mark just knelt down, handed me a bottle, and said, "I've dropped worse." He smiled like it wasn't a big deal, and maybe it wasn't, but to me, it cracked something open. I started taking longer walks after shift, sometimes past the high school, sometimes to the grocery store I didn't even need, just to hear noise, laughter, car doors slamming, the low hum of life happening without me. And slowly I stopped feeling like a ghost. I smiled back when people passed. I started wearing colors again, bought a yellow scarf. A woman in line at the pharmacy complimented it, and I nearly burst into tears. Because the last person who ever noticed what I wore was my mother, and that was 12 years ago. Then came the letter from the state. They wanted to interview me about my time as a caregiver. At first, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to relive it, didn't want to walk them through the 10 years of quiet ruin. But I said yes, not because I wanted justice anymore, because I wanted truth. So I told them everything, about the folders, the camera, the manipulation. They asked if I regretted turning him in. I said no, but I regretted not seeing it sooner. Not because it would have saved me, but because it would have taught me earlier what not to mistake for love. A few days later, I went back to the house. It had sold quickly. Small, accessible homes always do. The new owners were remodeling. The porch was gone. The door was painted blue. I didn't knock, didn't go inside. I just stood across the street and watched a young couple bring in a crib. That house had held lies, but now, maybe, it could hold something new. That mattered to me, more than I expected. One night at work, Mark asked if I wanted to join a few people for dinner after shift. I hesitated, then said yes, not because I wanted to meet anyone, but because I didn't want to keep saying no to things that didn't scare me anymore. The place was a diner, nothing special, but the pie was good, and I laughed, out loud, maybe for the first time in years. No one needed anything from me. No one was watching to see if I'd break, and for once, I didn't feel like I was performing wellness. I just was. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands. They looked the same, but they didn't feel the same, because these were the same hands that had carried, fed, cleaned, and supported a lie. And now they were mine again. No one owned them. No one owed them. I curled them into fists, then let them go. And in that moment, I realized something. You don't need revenge to heal. You just need distance and the courage to never go back. It had been 8 months since the court hearing, 9 since I walked out of the house for good. By then, I'd built something resembling a life, a routine. Not a performance this time, but something steady. Wake up, walk, coffee, work, books, tea, sleep. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. My phone didn't ring anymore with his name. No more voicemails from Todd. No letters, no drama, just peace. And then I saw him. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd stopped at the pharmacy to grab shampoo and hand lotion. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about dinner, about whether I'd buy a frozen lasagna or just make soup. Then I turned down the vitamin aisle, and there he was, wearing a clean flannel shirt, khakis. Leaning casually on a cart, reading the back of a bottle like nothing in the world was wrong. No limp, no cane, no trace of the man who once demanded I carry him to the bathroom in the middle of the night. He looked up, saw me, and smiled, a small, measured smile, like we were two old neighbors running into each other at the farmer's market, like I hadn't exposed him, like he hadn't stolen a decade of my life. My body went cold. Not panic, not fear, just absence. Like someone had pulled the plug on the moment, and all that was left was the buzzing of fluorescent lights overhead. He stepped closer, didn't say anything, just looked at me, waiting. I said nothing, not because I didn't have words, but because there was nothing I could say that would matter to a man like him. He tilted his head, like I was a dog that had forgotten a trick, then finally spoke. "You look good, Julia." That voice, that same rehearsed tone, like we were still on the same page. I turned and walked away. He didn't follow, but he didn't have to. The past never needs legs to catch up. It lives in your spine. I sat in my car for 15 minutes. Keys in the ignition, hands trembling, not with fear, with rage, not loud rage, quiet rage. The kind that knows there's no revenge good enough, no words sharp enough, because what do you say to someone who built a prison inside your home, then smiled at you from the warden's chair? Nothing. You say nothing, because monsters don't need explanations. They need silence to echo in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart ticking like a metronome just out of sync. I kept hearing that sentence. "You look good, Julia." It wasn't a compliment. It was a claim, like I was something he helped shape. Like he still owned a piece of me, and in that moment, I realized he still thought he'd won, not in court, but in my head. The next morning, I printed the photo. It was from 2 years ago. I had taken it by accident on my old phone, just a blurry shot of him standing in the kitchen, wine in hand, grinning. I kept it saved. Not as evidence, but as proof. Proof that the lie had a face, that it wore a smile, that it had a pulse. I didn't burn it, didn't throw it away. I taped it to the back of my closet door, out of sight, but not out of reach, not for revenge, but for remembrance. Because forgetting is not healing, it's erasure, and I didn't survive this just to pretend it never happened. The next week, I started therapy. Real therapy. Not journaling at midnight, not crying in stairwells. Actual, sit down, say it out loud therapy. The first session, I sat in the chair and said nothing for 10 minutes. Then I finally said, "My father faked a stroke and made me his nurse for 10 years. The therapist didn't flinch. She nodded once and said, "Let's talk about what that cost you." Not how it made me feel, not how to forgive. Just what it cost. And that was the first time I felt like someone was standing in the wreckage with me, not from above, but inside it. That weekend, I met Mark and a few coworkers at a fundraiser, nothing fancy, just a local dinner for the hospice volunteers. Someone played piano. A teenager read a poem about loss. People clapped politely. And then, during dessert, Mark asked if I wanted to dance. I almost said no. The reflex was still there, to pull away, to protect. But I said yes. We didn't say much. We just moved, slow and simple, and I realized I didn't feel watched, or judged, or needed, just present. No one owned me anymore, not even the ghosts. Later that night, I walked home alone. It was cold. My fingers were numb. But I felt clearer than I had in years. I paused at my door, looked up at the sky, clouds covering stars, and I whispered something I didn't expect. I forgive you. Not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want his name in my mouth anymore. I wanted space and peace and silence that didn't carry his weight. There's a strange silence that comes after survival. Not relief, not joy. Something quieter, like sitting in the theater after the credits have rolled. Everyone else gone, just you, the echo, and what's left behind. That's where I live now, in the echo, where things didn't hurt the way they used to, but still whispered when I turned the lights off. A patient died on a Monday. He was young, 42, pancreatic cancer. His sister flew in from Oregon to say goodbye. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "You made this bearable. You gave him dignity." It was the word that got me, dignity, because that was what I had been stripped of for so long. Not just time, not just energy, but dignity. When you spend 10 years tending to someone who lies in stillness, you forget you deserve to be seen, not as function, but as a person. One night, I found an old voicemail on a backup drive. It was my father's voice. From years ago, before the stroke, he was calling to say he'd made chili and to stop by if I wanted some. He said, "Don't work too hard, Jules." Then laughed, said he'd probably burn the cornbread again. And for a moment, just a moment, I missed him. Not the man in the bed, not the liar, the one before, the one who brought me gas when my car died in college, the one who sat on the bleachers during my high school graduation, clapping louder than anyone. I missed that version, the one that might have been real, even if just briefly. I started writing again. At first, just fragments. Sentences I couldn't say out loud. Things like, "I gave you 10 years, and you never once asked me how I was." And caretaking isn't love when it's taken, not given. Then it turned into pages, then into chapters. I didn't write for publication. I wrote to stay upright, because there's something sacred about telling your story before someone else twists it for you. Mark found out. He saw me writing during breaks, asked what it was. I told him the truth. He didn't pity me, didn't flinch. He just said, I'd read it. It was the first time someone said that without asking for the juicy parts. He wasn't curious. He was listening. That kind of attention felt cleaner than love. More honest, less hungry. I visited my mom's grave in early spring. It had been too long. Years, maybe. I don't even remember the last time I'd been there. I brought tulips. She loved tulips. I sat in the grass and told her everything. Not out loud. Not in full. Just pieces. Enough to feel like she heard me, like she'd been watching. I told her I was okay, that I left, that I was becoming something again, something honest. Todd sent an email, short, plain. He said Dad wasn't doing well, that he asked about me, that he wanted to talk. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's a locked door. Sometimes it's silence that stays silent. At the hospice, we got a new resident. Her name was June. She was 79 and wore bright lipstick every day, even when she could barely lift her hand. She once asked me, "What do you regret most?" I paused, then said, "Waiting for someone to rescue me when I had legs the whole time." She smiled. "Yeah," she said, "that'll do it." She died a week later, and for the first time I cried in front of a patient's family, not because of June, but because she reminded me that we all carry something, but not all of us die still chained to it. One night, I reread a paragraph from my journal that stopped me cold. It said, "I'm afraid that if I stop being useful, I'll stop being lovable." That's what he did to me, made me mistake service for connection, sacrifice for affection, but not anymore. Now, I wanted to be loved when I was doing nothing, when I was still, when I was messy. When I was simply there, I printed the first 30 pages of my story, held them in my hands, not as revenge, not as warning, but as evidence that I didn't disappear inside what happened, that I made something of it, that I chose not to be swallowed, because the truth doesn't heal you, it frees you, and freedom isn't peace, it's possibility. I didn't hear about his death right away. It came in the form of a forwarded obituary. No message, just a link. Sent from an old co-worker of Todd's, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. No cause was listed, just a date, a photo, and a single line. Frank M. Wallace passed peacefully in his home on Saturday, surrounded by family. That was a lie. He died alone. Todd told me later, weeks later, that no one was there. No nurse, no hospice, just a neighbor who called it in after the papers piled up at the door. A man who once staged helplessness to stay surrounded died unnoticed, in silence. The irony didn't feel satisfying. It just felt hollow. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anything at first. I just closed the tab, went back to my tea, and stared at the steam curling in the air like something escaping. I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't invited. Todd said it was private, said it wouldn't be right. But it was never about what was right. It never had been. It was always about control. And now, the only one who still wanted it was gone. A week later, I opened a new document, typed his name at the top, then deleted it because this story was never about him. It was about the aftermath, the dust. The cracked spine left behind when a life built on guilt finally collapses. I wrote the final page, the one that didn't ask for closure, didn't ask for justice, didn't ask for forgiveness. It just existed, quietly, and that was enough. I walked to the cemetery once, not to visit, just to pass by, to see the names carved in stone, all lined up like old receipts. There was a bench near the edge. I sat down, watched a couple place flowers 3 rows in. They cried, held hands, then left. The wind picked up. It smelled like grass and ash, that strange mix of beginnings and endings. And I realized I didn't need a grave to let go. I'd buried him long ago. In the pause before sleep, in the way I flinched at praise, in the years that went missing. His death was just paperwork. The grief had already passed through me like smoke. A letter came. Legal, plain envelope. It was his will. He left me the house I'd already sold, the house that never really belonged to me in the first place. He wrote a single sentence. I always knew you were the strong one. A sentence that felt like salt poured on a scar, then offered as medicine. Too late, too hollow, too rehearsed. I burned the letter, not out of anger, but because some words deserved to disappear. Then I made tea, turned on music, sat on the floor and watched the candle flicker. There was nothing left to prove. No one left to perform for. I had lived in someone else's story for so long. I forgot I could write my own. And now, I was. One evening, I found a voicemail saved on my backup app, old. It was me. Younger, tired. I was calling the pharmacy about a refill. My voice was soft, smaller, like I'd shrunk to fit the edges of someone else's comfort. I listened to the whole thing, then deleted it, not because I hated her, but because I forgave her. She did the best she could with what she was told. I work at a new hospice now, smaller, more intimate. I run it, hired, trained, built from the ground up. We keep the lights warm. We serve real food. We listen more than we talk. One of the younger nurses asked how I got into this line of work. I said, it started with a lie. He didn't ask more, just nodded. That's the thing about pain. Once it's been named, it doesn't need to be explained. I'm not married, not dating, not searching. I have peace, and peace is loud enough now. I have a bookshelf. It's filled with real stories, messy ones, ugly ones, but honest. Mine's in there too. The one I finished. Not for revenge, not to punish, just to remember, just to breathe. This isn't a confession or a triumph. This is a record, so that if someone else is kneeling beside a bed, washing someone's feet, feeding someone who won't look them in the eye, wondering if love is supposed to feel like this, they'll know. They're not crazy. They're not alone. And love isn't supposed to be silent suffering. It's supposed to hold you, not hollow you. If you're listening and this sounds like your life, get up. Not for drama, not for applause, not even for justice, just for you. You don't need a reason to walk away from the thing that's slowly killing you. You just need 1 second of courage. And when it hurts, because it will, know this. Pain is the price of truth, but truth is how you come back, not as who you were, but as someone who belongs to herself again. Now he's gone, and I still fold the towels the way he liked, but not for him, for me. What would you do in my place? Please write your thoughts in the comments. I will be happy to read them.